Welcome to the iCorps Experience, a tailored video series for business leaders seeking expert insights to master IT and cybersecurity complexities. Together, we'll unlock 30 years of award-winning managed services and consulting expertise straight from iCorps experts. We'll dive into critical IT and cybersecurity insights, explore straightforward best practices, and unlock actionable guidance to boost your business success. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the iCorps Experience. Today, we're tackling a topic that used to be considered a nice-to-have, but has quickly become a must-have for businesses of all sizes: cyber insurance. I'm Ruby Pontbriand from iCorps Technologies, and I'm here with my co-host, Katie Macdonald from Gradient Cyber. Katie, I feel like cyber insurance has gone from being that thing that companies put off to really being something that they can't afford to ignore. I mean, we've all seen it. Ransomware attacks are skyrocketing. Businesses are facing huge financial losses, and cyber criminals are getting way too smart for comfort. And now insurance providers are raising the bar on security requirements. So what does that mean for businesses? And how do they get covered? And most importantly, what will it actually cover when things go wrong? To break it all down, we've got two incredible experts with us today: Jeffery Lauria, Chief Information Security Officer at iCorps Technologies, and Neal Hartsell, Chief Marketing Officer at Gradient Cyber. So let's get into it.
So, Jeff, cyber insurance used to be something businesses considered nice to have, but now it feels essential. Why has it become such a necessity, especially for mid-market companies?
That's a great question. I think just by definition, insurance is insurance, right? The reality is you buy auto insurance because you might get into an accident, right? You buy a homeowner's insurance because something may happen. So you look at kind of cybersecurity insurance as what businesses ought to do. The reality is that there is a probability that you'll have a security-related event. Now, ideally, your goal is to make sure that security-related event is isolated and contained, but when it's not, it is extremely costly to recover. So cybersecurity insurance, really key to any business. It's just like having, accidental insurance, whatever the case may be, health insurance. It is to protect you against something, and then what you have to do is figure out what the risks are. Interestingly enough, what I'm seeing in the marketplace is when companies are doing due diligence requests. So, for example, we do a due diligence request on a vendor that we're going to deal with. We ask about their cybersecurity insurance, that they have it, and more importantly, does it extend back to their vendors? So, very, very important. I would not be in business today without it.
Okay. Well, so Jeff, we know cyber threats have really come a long way, unfortunately not in a good way. So they're getting smarter, sneakier, and they're harder to stop. Ransomware in particular has become a massive headache for businesses of all sizes. So can you walk us through how these threats have evolved and why cyber insurance is now such a crucial safety net?
Sure. So another great question. So let's look at ransomware 4 or 5 years ago, right? Ransomware 4 or 5 years ago was that they would actually just encrypt all your files, hold you hostage until you actually pay money. But ransomware has changed a lot. So now it's not necessarily about holding you hostage to get your files back. The common recurring theme that we're seeing is that, okay, you know what? I have your files, I've encrypted them. By the way, I've taken them, I have them, and we can talk about how you do that. And if you don't pay us the ransom, I'm going to expose these files out in the wild, right? So this is more of kind of the threats that we're seeing. And the reason we're seeing that is because these threat actors realize that, everyone has backups, right? The reality is encrypt all my files. Great. You know what? I'm just going to restore from backup. So I think in the last 4 or 5 years for backup and recovery, DR and those things, companies have flourished. They've figured out how to solve this problem. Now it is, let me hold you hostage, but here's the threat of me releasing this. The reason being here in the US, in the EU, data being leaked out is very, very costly. And it's costly from 2 areas, right? Reputation, we'll bring this back momentarily to cybersecurity, but also regulatory compliance. So you're going to be fined a whole lot of money. Cybersecurity insurance will do a few things, depending upon how the policy is written. One is it will pay ransom, right? Which is great. It will pay the ransom. In addition to which, it'll help you with basically incident response. And incident response can be things like just how our company deals with the PR aspect of it. Also, will potentially pay any sort of regulatory fees. May also help you with mandatory requirements for, let's say, a credit bureau, right? Each state is different, and each state has their own kind of models for compliance and for data leaks and things of that nature and data breaches. So you definitely want to look at what your state's requirements are and then your industry requirements. But cybersecurity insurance, if the policy is written correctly, will cover those. The other thing that you need to think about when we're talking about cybersecurity insurance is a lot of times organizations, let's say SMB, somewhere 25 user organization, 50 user organization, $1 million policy is enough. It sounds like a lot. It really does sound like a lot, but in most cases, it may not be enough, right? Just restoring a typical company to a working state may take weeks of labor and it could run you $200,000. Well, that's just the restore. Let's talk about these other things. So look at that. I recommend just kind of sitting down and figuring out the worst case scenario is on paper. Realize, so for example, the state of Massachusetts, like a lot of other states, if there is a data breach, you are potentially fined X amount per record, figure out what that math is and go from there.
Neal, when companies consider cyber insurance, one of their first questions is, what does it actually cover? Can you break down what businesses can typically expect and what's often excluded?
Yeah, Jeffrey touched on a few elements of coverage, but let me double down on that and go into a little more depth. So not surprisingly, policies will vary. Jeffrey mentioned they can vary by state. They obviously will vary by insurer. But there's some buckets that you typically will see covered. The first will be incident response costs. If you get hit, you're going to incur some costs with respect to forensically figuring out what happened. You have to deal with breach notifications of your customers and other entities. You're probably going to have to deal with legal fees. That's a bucket. The second would be business interruption costs or losses. Third would be ransomware payments. Now, that's an evolving part of all policies as we learn more and more about how ransomware payments are being addressed, but there's a coverage provision in most cases for that. A fourth area of coverage could be data recovery and system restoration. If you've been through an incident, then your servers are going to be locked up through encryption mechanisms. There's some work to restore them to some prior state, takes time, energy, money. And then the fifth area of coverage usually is some form of liability for third-party claims. Obviously, if you're a publicly traded company, this gets sticky pretty quickly, but there can be customer lawsuits after a breach, and there may be a provision to help, defray those costs. Now, there are also things that policies typically do not cover. So exclusions could include things like nation-state attacks. Most insurers are going to view nation-state attacks from a force majeure point of view. That's an act beyond their control. It's got extenuating circumstances. It's not something they're going to feel they have to cover. A second would be if you fail as a company or an entity to maintain, good minimum security controls, they're not going to provide coverage in the case of an incident. And the third would be if you have pre-existing vulnerabilities that you did not take care of, they're probably going to say, hey, you didn't do your housekeeping, your policy is voided. So that's some things to think about in terms of areas that probably should be covered. You should expect to see them, and some areas that you're probably not going to be able to get covered.
Thanks, Neal. So now that we have a better idea of what a typical cyber insurance policy actually covers, I'd love to talk about cost. So what factors actually are influencing pricing? And, for those mid-market or small businesses, what kind of a price range should they actually expect from cyber insurance?
Well, this too is very much of an it depends, as anyone might imagine, but factors that will quickly dial in premium costs will be your company size and what industry you're in. Industries that are more highly targeted, like healthcare and financial services, they're simply going to have to pay more than industries that are less targeted. Your security posture will weigh into what your premium costs will be. If you have weak controls, as I mentioned previously, your premiums are going to be higher. It's analogous to if you have an 18-year-old son, you can get car insurance for him. It's going to cost you more than it will be for an 18-year-old daughter, just by definition. So posture matters. A third would be if you have an incident history. If you're a company who has been hit before, if you've had, previous noteworthy security incidents, your premiums are probably going to be higher. The fourth would be, is there any sort of third-party risk? If you have dependence on other vendors or cloud services, that's a risk vector for the insurer, so they're going to factor that into the cost. So there's many things that will affect a premium, but maybe just a thumbnail about what it will cost for mid-market companies. You might expect to see, premiums anywhere from $5,000 to $100,000 a year, depending on the risk factors that I mentioned previously.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, Neal, when you mentioned their history of a breach potentially being a factor that they include. But when insurers evaluate a company's cyber risk, what are they really looking for? How do things like security frameworks, MFA, endpoint protection, and employee training affect coverage and premiums?
Well, so if an insurer or an underwriter is going to write a policy, obviously they're in the risk business. They know how to run actuarial. So they're seeking a set of factors that would sort of help them dial in the risk of insuring your organization. And in order to do that, they're going to measure things like security frameworks. Are you trying to adhere to NIST or CIS or ISO 27001 standards? Do you have multi-factor authentication in place and privileged access management? Are you really managing those carefully and keeping them up to date? The lack of those is going to be a red flag for an insurer right away. To your point, do you have endpoint protection? Do you have EDR solutions deployed? Do you have network monitoring in place? Underwriters are always going to give the nod to businesses that have 24/7 monitoring from a service like MXDR versus, hey, we've got people who are watching things from an 8 to 5 point of view. Are you taking the right measures to train your employees? Do you have good employee awareness of the whole topic of phishing, which clearly remains a very top attack vector for anyone? So training really matters. Have you done these things? So they're going to check those kinds of attributes of your security posture, how you're managing your employees, your security, the security of your business at large. If you fail to do any of those things, they might still write, but you're going to see higher premiums, or they may choose to just deny coverage.
Well, thank you, Neal. So Jeff, a lot of companies really struggle to meet all of these security requirements. So my question is, how can an MSSP help businesses navigate cyber insurance and make sure that they're checking all those right boxes?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things, and it really, so there are two ways to look at this. I think an MSSP is going to bring best practices to a customer. And best practices generally, and I think Neal hit upon this, is not what the MSP thinks, it's the framework in which they're going to align you to. So they're going to align you to either a NIST framework like cybersecurity framework or CIS 18 or your own industry. So that's the first place to start. So I think the first place to start is every organization, regulated or not, should be aligned to a framework. Think of a framework as a roadmap or an operation guide on how to run IT. So I think that's the first part, right? So working with an MSSP, they'll align you to a framework. And frankly, if they're not aligning you to a framework, that might be an issue because a lot of these regulations, again, we'll talk state to state, actually specifically call out frameworks, specifically around things like safe harbor kind of provisioning. So working MSP is going to align you to that framework, and they're going to do those simple things. So when we talk about cybersecurity insurance, the first thing a cybersecurity insurance company is going to do, which would be the first thing I would do, is they're going to look at your public posture. What does that mean? That means they're going to go look at your DNS records, and they're going to make sure those look healthy. If they don't look healthy and they're neglected, then that says a lot about everything else you may potentially be doing. We have our CEO, one of the things that he will say is if you're on an airplane, you pull down the table and there's a coffee stain, what does that say about other things? Similarly here, if the little low-hanging fruit's not done properly, then what does that say? So good MSP is going to look at you from the outside in. They're going to look at you from your public view. Think about it as doing a D&B on a business, right? What is their kind of view? What do they look like externally? Then they're going to help you with the controls inside. Those frameworks that I mentioned prior, those help an MSP. They help two things. They help an MSP make sure they're aligning you properly, but you as a customer understand that oh, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is the business impact of doing it. And that all feeds into cybersecurity insurance. What Neal said, which actually is awesome, is one of the things that may happen is, and I don't think we actually touched upon this fully, cybersecurity insurance is awesome. But if you're not conforming to the standard and you cannot show that you've done that, so for example, if you can't show that you're backup and restoring and you're testing, or if you can't show that MDR, XDR is not in place, if you can't show this, you have no proof, there is a possibility if an event happens, they're going to say, you know what, we're not going to cover you. So it is very important to align to a framework. Framework will help you with the controls and then being able to show that you actually do this. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, that was super helpful. So Neal, we've talked about cyber insurance and also about security measures, but where does managed extended detection and response come into play? How does it support businesses in reducing cyber risk and meeting insurer requirements?
Well, obviously it's the business we're in, so we think it's, tantamount, but I think the nut is the way insurers look at it is they view something like MXDR as a significant reduction in risk. So if it's in place, they're going to believe that the entity has the ability to do things like continuous 24/7 threat monitoring, the ability to automatically respond, reduce dwell time, and limit the impact of a security incident. They're going to value the fact that an MXDR solution will do detailed logging and reporting that provides insurance with evidence of strong security controls. They will view it as improving how they, deal with outcomes. So some insurers will offer discounted premiums for companies that have a robust MXDR solution in place. So those are all elements that will weigh into kind of the premium and how an insurer responds to an organization it wants to cover. There's another element though, and that is if you are ever hit, if there's an incident, any incident response organization is almost always going to use some kind of a detection and response solution as part of the restoration process. They're going to go through a rigorous step-by-step approach to get you back up and running. And the way they do that is they're going to take your network down and they're going to bring every element of your network back up very carefully. And they're looking for evidence of where the attacker has embedded himself or herself along the way. So that's an important part of what MXDR does to respond to an incident. And then when your IR team goes away and that incident is closed off and you have your business restored, typically you'll see MXDR being left behind on a continuous basis because you want to keep eyes on these things, and cyber insurers will expect that to be the case.
Great. Thank you. So, Jeff, back to you. Real world examples always really bring these conversations to life. So I was wondering if you could just share some cases where cyber insurance made a big difference or even where it wasn't enough.
Yeah, that's great. So again, I think you have to look at your business as a whole, but I'm going to give you two examples. One's a law firm. So a law firm that came to us was under cyber attack and their servers were all encrypted. They were just having some issues. So this law firm was 10 lawyers, 4 or 5 paralegals, and some administrative staff. Now, from a consulting point of view, from getting them back up and running, it was X amount of dollars. But what wasn't factored in was loss of productivity. And I'm going to give you an industry that actually makes pencils, but it was loss of productivity. So those attorneys couldn't go to court. They couldn't get their documents. They had to reschedule. Now, with that said, the paralegals weren't doing their work. So although cybersecurity insurance took care of the restoration, they got them back up and running, they didn't take into consideration lost productivity. And lost productivity is very, very important, right? So one of the things is when you're building a cybersecurity insurance policy, restoration, obviously, ransomware, obviously, but lost productivity is something you need to look at. Likewise, we dealt with a company that made pencils. They lost 4 24-hour shifts to the tune of about $750,000. And the insurance company didn't take care of that. It took care of everything else. So again, I think insurance, like anything else, is you have to look at your full policy. You have to look at business interruption. what that looks like, who's going to pay these people if they can't work, what's the typical restore time. So cybersecurity insurance can be very, very good, but like everything else, it can miss things. So for someone who has a homeowner's insurance, who doesn't buy flood insurance, but lives in a flood area, I just forgot about it. I assume the insurance is going to take care of it. No, you need to be very specific on your scenario. So for most companies, they should sit down with their chief information officer or their, a chief security officer and walk through, we call them tabletop exercises, and walk through these exercises, understand where the pain point is, and then build your policy around that. And by the way, document it all.
For mid-market businesses that don't have cyber insurance yet, where should they start? Neal, what are the security measures they need to have in place first?
Well, I imagine anyone who's heard this podcast could already feel a bit overwhelmed. It's like, where do you actually start if you want to go down this path? And I think there's probably, 5 things to consider if you don't have a policy in place. First is, by definition, you need to really assess your own security posture. You need to know where your vulnerabilities are. You need to identify and close any gaps. You need to do that before you apply. That's going to be a key factor in terms of, premium costs, as we discussed. The second thing would be, go ahead and implement, very standard traditional security controls. Make sure you put into place things like multi-factor authentication. You probably at least need to have an EDR solution and ideally an MXDR solution that's looking at more than just endpoint telemetry. A third key one is make sure you're doing some kind of an employee training program. Employees are not nefarious by nature, but they are careless. It's just the nature of us as humans. People have to be educated on what it means to be constantly vigilant about emails and what looks like a phishing attack and what doesn't. It takes training, it takes continuous training. So do those things. The third thing would be put together an incident response plan now. Go ahead and there's good guidance on the internet, or you can talk to an IR company, but have a plan in place that gives you clear stepped function processes to do if you ever get hit. And last but not least, these things are best done by people who can help you that are doing this day in and day out. So that's where talking to an MSP/MSSP like iCorps, who deals with many companies, they can help shepherd you through this process probably better than you're going to be able to do on your own. And they'll be able to bring in an appropriate MXDR type solution. That's, of course, what we do. And that's going to be not only important to managing your overall premiums and adherence to standards and the expectations that are accrued there, but it also gives you that peace of mind that when things have all settled out, you've got your policy in place, you really do have something monitoring 24/7, looking for evidence of attacks before they mature into a ransomware or data loss or data lockup type situation. So those are the 5 things I would say. Just follow that recipe if you don't have a policy, but you want to go down this path.
So even knowing those 5 things, it still feels like it could be probably a little overwhelming for these organizations. So ones that are considering an MSP or an MSSP, Jeffrey, how can they help guide them through this process?
Sure. So a couple of things. For people who don't know, an MSP is a managed service provider, and an MSSP is a managed security service provider. And a lot of these MSPs that have been around for so many years are kind of evolving into an MSSP. However, to really be an MSSP, a managed security provider, you really need depth, you need talent. So I think, when working with your MSP, your current vendor will say, ask about their security team. So I have my business, I have lots of, I'm concerned about all these regulations and security. Hey, I want to talk to you, MSP, MSSP, about my security posture. And you really want to make sure they're in the position to help you. Now, that can be very confusing, but if they don't use things like, let's align you a framework, well, that should be a big red flag, right? Because you need to be judged by something that's independent that everybody else sees, not by what the MSP thinks. So aligning to a framework. Hey, who's on your staff? Let's talk about your staff. A lot of times these MSSPs will hire junior people and put them forward facing. So are these folks industry recognized? Are they going to be something that I can rely upon? We call it a defendable position, right? Are they going to be defendable? Okay, now you know what? I've had a problem. I find myself in some sort of legal mess. Let me bring in my MSSP. Oh yeah, this guy started 3 weeks ago and he's giving you advice. So experience. So I think for a lot of companies, like anything else, you need to do your due diligence as you would with your accounting team or as you would with your payroll team. Ask the right questions. And what are those right questions? Really, they are, who's the team? Who am I working with? What's their experience? That is first and foremost. What frameworks am I going to be following? Meaning, not just your opinion, but what am I going to be following? What I'm going to be judged by? And what does my maturity look like? So again, 3 very simple things, right? Do your due diligence. Who am I working with? Where are they relevant to the industry? What framework am I following and why? And how am I going to be judged? And what is my monthly reporting cycle look like? There are some great MSPs out there that do great security services. You just want to make sure that they're right fit for you. Those 3 simple questions should help, or at least start the conversation that you can then go down the road with.
Well, that's great. Thank you both. It's been such a great conversation. We know cyber threats, they aren't slowing down, and it's really pretty clear that businesses can't just cross their fingers anymore and just hope for the best. The good news is that with the right security in place and a solid cyber insurance policy, it seems like companies can really protect themselves and bounce back faster if something does go wrong.
Ruby,
so Jeff,
let me add one more thing to that. If you work with an MSP today and they're not doing these things, you need to ask why. And I think that's also very important. A lot of times clients will say, this is not important, right? Or, you know what, I'm going to take this risk. And I get it. But if they're not doing it, why aren't they doing it? Remember, these are the folks that should be helping you get your security posture. However, it is a joint responsibility. It's a combination of the MSP, it's a combination of the cloud provider, but it's also you as a firm understanding where you need to be. So I apologize, but I just wanted to get that piece in.
No, that's great. I definitely appreciate that because it kind of leads into, I'm wrapping up and, also just looking for between, the two of you, you can each, provide this, but what would be one key takeaway or a piece of advice that you would give to businesses who are trying to figure this all out? And it seems, Jeff kind of lead it into that with, if your MSSP or MSP is not doing these things, that, ask that question, why not? So I think that's a great, flag to look for. But if you have any other additional key takeaway or advice for businesses that are just trying to navigate this, what would that be?
I think IT is a hard concept for people to overall understand, right? Cybersecurity insurance, policies, regulations. It's a lot for people to understand. So I just let's put it in context. You have security cameras at home. The idea of the security cameras at home are to watch your property, watch your areas, watch your doors, watch for threats. And if you're not doing that exact same thing on your IT systems, then there's a problem, right? So your IT systems are an extension of your business. That's what they are. They're part of your business. So, you have a card swipe when you go into your office, or you have security cameras in front of your office. If you're not looking at your systems 24/7, you're not looking at your users' behavior 24/7. Everything Neal said a few minutes ago, if you're not doing that, then there's a problem. At minimum, you should be looking at what's going on in your IT environment. That is the minimalist. And if it's not happening and you can't answer the question, simple question. Hey, what did Mary do last Tuesday? And if your MSP can't tell you what Mary did last Tuesday, that might be an issue. Neal, thoughts?
I think for me, the key takeaway would be when you just think about insurance in general, there is a fundamental difference between something like car insurance and cyber insurance. And you need to be aware of this. Here's the difference. With car insurance, you can find an insurer that'll write a policy for your 18-year-old son. It might cost you, but you'll find one. They're not going to exercise you on his behavior, his past. They're not going to go deep on that. It's a 5-minute conversation on a phone call and they write the policy. You're done. That's not the case with cyber insurance. It comes down to a simple principle, which is you could have a cyber insurance policy or not to guard against calamity. But either way, you've got to do the things that we talked about to prepare yourself for a cyber insurance policy, or you're not going to get one, or their premiums are going to be outrageous. So everything that we've discussed on this call really is best security practice, best defense in depth cybersecurity approach. You need to go do those things irrespective of a cyber insurance, attack policy. So you can have that as a backstop. But as we all know, the best thing you can do when you get in your car and go out and drive is be aware of what's going on around you. Use your own best practices. The very same thing is true principally for cyber insurance. If you think you're going to write a policy and just be covered and not do the things that you have to do to guard yourself, that's not going to work out well.
Makes sense. That's great. Well, I really appreciate both of your insights. I think it's been a great chat here with a lot of actionable tips for folks in small businesses to enterprise on just really how to tackle this cybersecurity insurance beast, if you will. So really appreciate both of you for all your insights. And thank you, Katie, for co-hosting here with me today on this episode of the iCorps Experience, all about cyber insurance. Thanks all. And that's a wrap on today's episode of the iCorps Experience. If there's one thing we learned, it's that cyber threats aren't slowing down, which means businesses can't afford to sit back and hope for the best. The good news is that with the right security measures in place and a solid cyber insurance policy, companies can protect themselves and recover faster when things go south. So for those of you listening, if you're wondering where to start, remember, get your security in order first. Insurance providers are looking for things like MFA, endpoint protection, and 24/7 monitoring. Work with an MSSP that knows the ins and outs of both cybersecurity and insurance requirements. And don't assume that your policy covers everything. Read the fine print and make sure that your business isn't caught off guard. And if you're looking for one of those thorough MSSPs that Jeff was talking about, give us a shout. iCorps Technologies is here to help businesses strengthen their security and navigate cyber insurance with confidence. And if you need cutting-edge MXDR expertise, Gradient Cyber has you covered with 24/7 threat detection and response. Visit iCorps.com and gradientcyber.com to learn more, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for the latest updates, expert insights, and cybersecurity best practices. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the iCorps Experience, your ultimate resource for cutting-edge IT and cybersecurity insights for your business, backed by 30 years of expertise. Follow us on LinkedIn to stay in the know and catch the entire series on our YouTube channel. If you're looking for more personalized guidance, iCorps' award-winning managed services and consulting team is here to help. Contact us today to learn how we can support your business growth. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on the iCorps Experience.